They called me useless the day they threw me out. Funny thing about that, I saw it coming. Literally, there are two kinds of rejection in the Omegaverse. The first kind is clean, a formal severance, ink on packed documents, a warden's stamp, your scent mark crossed out in the registry like a clerical error. Efficient, almost respectful if you squint hard enough and tilt your head at exactly the right angle. The second kind is the one I got. The kind where three alpha kings stand in a marble-floored boardroom on the 40th floor of the Voss Pack Tower in downtown Colorado Springs, with the Rockies glittering through the floor-to-ceiling windows behind them, like God decided to set the backdrop for maximum dramatic irony, and one of them slides a folder across the table without even making eye contact. "Ew, you've been assessed," Caden Voss said. His voice was the temperature of February. "The results are inconclusive at best, insufficient at worst." I looked at that folder. Then I looked at him. Inconclusive. 24 years of my life, and the best this man could offer me was inconclusive. "So," I said, keeping my voice perfectly even, "when you say insufficient, do you mean my scent profile, my compatibility scores, or just me, generally, as a person and a living human being?" Rhett Voss, standing to Caden's left with his arms crossed and his jaw set like he was personally offended by my existence, made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh, more like contempt wearing a laugh's coat. "Don't make this difficult," he said. "Oh, I'm sorry." I pressed my hand flat against the table. "When was I supposed to make it easy for you to tell me I'm worthless?" "Let me check my schedule." "Nope. I'm all booked up on dignity today, so you're going to have to work around that." That was the moment I felt it. The vision hit me like a current, electric and sudden, shooting up from my palm where it touched the cold marble. It lasted maybe 3 seconds. Long enough. A room, darker than this one. The same three men, but broken. Caden's hands shaking, Rhett's voice cracking on my name. And Sawyer. Quiet, golden Sawyer standing at a window with his forehead pressed against the glass like he was trying to push himself through it. And me, standing in a doorway, deciding. Then it was gone. I pulled my hand off the table and tucked it into my lap before any of them could see it trembling. This was the problem with being precognitive in a world that had already decided I was useless. The visions didn't come with instructions. They didn't come with timestamps or context or a helpful little caption that said, "This is going to be okay, Eli, I promise." They just came, raw and fractured and completely uninterested in my emotional availability. I'd been having them since I was 16. Little flashes, a car accident I warned my mother about 2 days before it happened, a fire at my college dorm that I evacuated 12 people from because I woke up screaming about smoke that wasn't there yet. My old Pax Omega coordinator called it a psychological anomaly. Recommended meditation and chamomile tea. I recommended she consider a career change. The thing I hadn't told anyone. Not the Voss Pack assessment team. Well, not the compatibility specialists. Not the three men currently looking at me like I was a moderately inconvenient piece of furniture. Was that my precognition was getting stronger. More specific. More brutal. More them. I'd been seeing flashes of the Voss triplets for 3 months before I ever set foot in this building. Fragments. Caden's profile against winter light. Rhett's hands. Those scarred, careful hands. Catching something I dropped. Sawyer's voice saying my name in the dark like it was the only word he remembered. I thought it was a sign that this was where I belonged. Turns out the universe has a genuinely sick sense of humor. Eli, that was Sawyer, the third one. He hadn't spoken until now, and when he did, his voice was different, lower, less certain than his brother's. He was standing slightly apart from them, like he drifted there without meaning to. His dark eyes moving over my face was something that wasn't quite coldness. "The pack has made its decision. I'm sorry." The apology landed wrong, too soft for the room, too real for the moment. Caden shot him a look. Sawyer looked away. "There it is," I thought. "There's the fracture." I stood up, took the folder. Didn't open it because I already knew what was inside. The termination of my candidacy, the revocation of my provisional pack status, and probably a very tasteful letterhead that made bureaucratic rejection feel almost civilized. Well, I said, tucking the folder under my arm and straightening my jacket with the kind of composure that takes years of practice and a deep personal investment in not crying in front of powerful men. This has been a genuinely illuminating Tuesday. I particularly enjoyed the part where you used the word insufficient, like I was a quarterly earnings report. Rhett's jaw twitched. Caden said nothing. He was already turning back toward the window, which told me everything I needed to know about how much this moment would cost him. Nothing, I thought. It costs him nothing. Sawyer was still watching me. I didn't look at him again. Couldn't. Because the last vision I'd had of Sawyer Voss, the one I hadn't told anyone, the one that woke me up at 3 in the morning with my heart slamming against my ribs, was this. His forehead pressed to mine, his hands cupping my face, and his voice wrecked and desperate, saying, "Don't go. Please, I can't fix it if you're gone." I didn't know what he needed to fix. I didn't know when it happened. I didn't know if I wanted it to. What I knew was this. I walked out of the Voss Pack Tower at 2:47 p.m. on a Wednesday in October with a rejection folder under my arm and the Colorado wind cutting straight through my jacket. And somewhere in the city below me, my future was already moving. I just couldn't see it clearly enough yet. But I would. The elevator doors closed behind me, and I finally let out the breath I'd been holding for the last 20 minutes. It came out shaky, embarrassingly shaky, like my lungs had been waiting for permission. The elevator was empty, which was the only mercy this building had shown me all day. I leaned back against the mirrored wall and stared at the folder in my hands. Crisp white edges. The Voss Pack emblem embossed in silver on the front cover. 3 interlocking circles that were supposed to represent unity, strength, honor, and legacy. Right now, it just looked like a very expensive way to say you don't belong here. I flipped it open. Page 1 was exactly what I expected. Formal rejection language dressed up in $12 words. Compatibility assessment inconclusive. Secondary designation markers below pack threshold. Provisional candidacy hereby terminated. Page 2 was the part that surprised me. Not because of what it said, because of what was handwritten in the margin. Small, slightly uneven letters that didn't match the clean corporate font of the rest of the document. This wasn't unanimous. 3 words, no signature. But the handwriting had a particular quality to it. Careful but rushed, like someone who made a decision quickly and then second-guessed it immediately after. I stared at it for 4 full floors of dissent. Then I closed the folder. Not unanimous, which meant at least one of them voted to keep me, which meant one of those 3 cold, impossible, infuriating men had looked at the assessment results and said, "Wait." The elevator hit the lobby and the doors opened, and I walked out into the marble atrium of Voss Pack Tower, telling myself very firmly that it did not matter, that I did not care, that whoever wrote those 3 words in the margin could take their belated conscience, and I walked directly into a wall, except the wall had a heartbeat. I bounced back, the folder flying out of my hands, papers scattering across the polished floor in a way that was genuinely, cosmically humiliating. My palm hit the marble to catch myself, and the vision came before I could stop it. Fast this time, brutal. Snow, somewhere outside the city. A cabin with warm light in the windows. My voice saying, "I told you so," to someone I couldn't see yet. Laughter, real, unguarded laughter. And then a hand finding mine in the dark. Gone. I blinked. My palm was stinging. My papers were everywhere. And crouching down in front of me, gathering them with hands that I recognized from 3 months of fragmented dreams, was Sawyer Voss. Of course it was. "You dropped these," he said, like I hadn't noticed. Like I was the kind of person who scattered my own humiliation across lobby floors for fun. "Incredible observation," I said, pushing myself upright. "Has anyone told you that you have a real gift for stating the obvious?" Something moved across his face. Not quite a smile, more like the memory of one. He collected the last page and stood, white, and he was closer than I expected. Close enough that I caught his scent for the first time without the antiseptic boardroom air filtering it into nothing. Pine resin and wood smoke, and something warmer underneath. Something that hit the back of my throat like an answer to a question I hadn't asked out loud. My entire nervous system short-circuited. This was the thing about scent recognition in the Omegaverse that nobody talked about honestly. It wasn't romantic the first time. It was disorienting, like suddenly remembering a word in a language you didn't know you spoke, like your body recognizing something your brain was still arguing about. My instinct said him. My brain said absolutely not. We just got rejected by his pack. We have dignity. My instincts were not particularly interested in dignity right now. When Sawyer held the folder out to me, his eyes moved over my face with that same careful attention from the boardroom, and up close I could see it more clearly. Whatever lived behind his expression, it wasn't indifference. It was something more complicated and considerably more inconvenient. "Are you all right?" he asked. "Fantastic," I said, taking the folder. Our fingers didn't touch. I was very deliberate about that. I love being told I'm insufficient before lunch. Really sets a motivating tone for the rest of the week. "Eli," the way he said my name stopped me, quiet and direct, like he'd been holding it in his mouth for longer than this conversation. I looked at him. Big mistake, because Sawyer Voss, up close, without his brothers flanking him like a matching set of emotional unavailability, was something I was not prepared for. The sharp jaw and the dark eyes were the same, but there was something exhausted in him, something that had been carrying weight for a long time and was starting to feel it. "The decision wasn't mine, huh?" he said. "I know," I said. "I read the margin notes." His expression flickered, just for a second, like I'd said something that landed somewhere tender. "Then you know it wasn't unanimous," he said carefully. "I do." I tilted my head. "And I know you're the one who wrote it. Your handwriting curves left, slightly anxious. Probably a middle child thing, except you're a triplet, so I'm not sure the birth order psychology applies neatly." I paused. "Sorry, I do that when I'm stressed." Sawyer stared at me. "You profile handwriting," he said slowly. "I profile a lot of things. It's a gift and a curse, and much like everything else about me." I tucked the folder under my arm and turned toward the exit. The automatic doors opened ahead of me, letting in a rush of Colorado October air, cold and clean and smelling absolutely nothing like pine resin and wood smoke. "Tell your brothers I said good luck finding an Omega who scores high enough on their very thorough assessment rubric. I genuinely hope the paperwork brings them joy." "Wait." I didn't stop walking. "Eli." His voice carried across the lobby and several people turned to look, which meant he either didn't notice or didn't care. "There's something you should know before you leave." I pushed through the door. Outside, the wind hit me immediately, and underneath it, so faint I almost convinced myself I imagined it. And was the ghost of wood smoke trailing out behind me like a question I hadn't answered yet? My hand was still tingling where it hit the marble. Not the marble, something in me said quietly. The vision, snow, a cabin, his hand finding yours in the dark. I kept walking. The thing about Colorado Springs in October is that it does not care about your emotional state. The wind coming off the Rockies hits you regardless. The sky stays that particular shade of brutal blue that makes everything feel simultaneously vast and suffocating. The city moves around you at its own pace, indifferent to the fact that you just got rejected by the most powerful pack in the state, and then nearly fell on your face in their lobby, and then had a vision of snow and warmth and a hand finding yours in the dark. The city does not care. I respected that about it. I had parked 3 blocks from the tower because the Voss Pack building charged $17 for visitor parking, and I had made a personal policy of not giving powerful men money they did not need. So I walked those 3 blocks with the folder under my arm and the wind in my face and my heartbeat doing something completely unacceptable and irregular. The decision wasn't mine. I replayed the way Sawyer said it, the particular weight he put on mine, like the word cost him something, like he had been carrying the shape of it around for a while and was relieved to set it down somewhere, even briefly, even in a lobby conversation that lasted 90 seconds and ended with me walking away. "Stop," I told myself firmly. The man's pack just rejected you, formally, with embossed letterhead. Focus. Not my car was a 2019 Honda Civic that had seen better decades. The passenger seat had a coffee stain that I had named Gerald. I got in, dropped the folder on Gerald, and sat there for a moment with both hands on the steering wheel and the engine off. The vision from the lobby was still sitting at the back of my mind like a splinter. Not painful enough to demand attention, but too present to ignore. Snow, warm light, his hand in the dark. The problem with precognition, and I cannot stress this enough, was that it showed you what without showing you why. I had seen flashes of the Voss triplets for 3 months. I had seen warmth and conflict and a version of something that looked almost like belonging. And I had walked into that assessment with the careful, private hope that maybe the universe was pointing me somewhere for a reason. Then the universe handed me a rejection folder and a margin note and Sawyer Voss's wood smoke scent in a lobby and apparently considered that a complete and satisfying answer. Okay, I said out loud to my empty car. New plan. Gerald the coffee stain offered no input. I leave, I find a different pack. I apply to the Hartley Collective in Denver. They have decent compatibility metrics, and nobody there has ever made me feel like a quarterly earnings report. I nodded. This is a good plan. This is a rational, emotionally intelligent plan made by a person who is completely fine. I reached for my phone. It buzzed before I touched it. Unknown number. Colorado Springs area code. And I stared at it for 3 full seconds with the particular suspicion of someone whose precognition had just spent the last 3 months making their life complicated. I answered it. If this is a spam call, I said, I want you to know I'm precognitive and I already know your sales pitch doesn't work on me. Silence on the other end. Then low and careful, a voice I did not expect. It's Sawyer. My hand tightened on the phone. How do you have this number? I said. Not a question. More of an accusation dressed up in questions clothing. Pack registry, he said. It's in your application file. That is a genuinely alarming amount of access to my personal information for a pack that just told me I'm insufficient. I know. A pause, something shifted in the quality of his silence. I need to talk to you. Not here. Not in the building. Sawyer, I said his name flat and deliberate. Your pack rejected me 4 floors up approximately 12 minutes ago. Whatever you need to talk to me about, the time for that conversation was before Caden slid that folder across the table like I was a problem he was filing away. It's about the assessment results. I have the assessment results. They're on my passenger seat being judged by a coffee stain named Gerald. Another pause. Longer this time. You named your coffee stain, he said. Gerald has been with me through difficult times. He has earned his name. I pressed my back against the car seat and looked up at the headliner. What about the results? There was a second page, Sawyer said carefully. Not the one in your folder. An internal document that wasn't included in your copy. Everything in me went very still. What kind of internal document? I said. The kind that changes the context of everything Caden said in that room. His voice was measured, controlled. But underneath it was something tight and urgent that his control could not quite flatten. Eli, your scent profile didn't come back inconclusive because of a deficiency. I waited. It came back inconclusive, he said, because it matched all 3 of us. The wind outside rocked my car gently. The Rockies sat against the horizon, enormous and unhurried, completely unbothered by the fact that Sawyer Voss had just detonated something inside my chest. All 3, I repeated. All 3, he confirmed. A triple match bond. It's the first one recorded in this pack's history. Caden called it a statistical anomaly. He said the results couldn't be trusted. A beat. I didn't agree. I looked at the folder sitting on Gerald. Not unanimous. Where do you want to meet? I said. He said a coffee shop 2 blocks east of the tower. A place called Groundwork, tucked between a dry cleaner and a legal office. The kind of spot that existed in every American city and somehow always smelled exactly the same. Roasted beans and old wood and somebody's abandoned pastry going stale near the window. I found it in 4 minutes because I was already parked nearby and because my feet apparently made the decision before my brain finished arguing about it. And I ordered a black coffee at the counter because I needed something to hold, and because spending $4 felt like a reasonable price for the illusion of having my hands occupied and my expression neutral. The barista had a nose ring and did not ask me how my day was going, which I appreciated enormously. I picked a table near the back wall, sight lines to the door. Old habit. When you grow up knowing things before they happen, you develop a preference for seeing what's coming. Sawyer walked in 6 minutes later. He had taken off his suit jacket. Just the dress shirt now, sleeves rolled to the elbow, which was either a deliberate attempt to look less like the man who just sat in a boardroom and watched his brothers reject me, or it was the most accidentally effective thing he could have done. He scanned the room, found me. He then crossed toward the table with the kind of walk that said he was used to being watched. He sat down across from me. I looked at him over the rim of my cup. "Before you say anything," I said, "I want to establish some ground rules. 1, I am not going to perform any kind of emotional reaction for your benefit. 2, I need you to talk to me like a person and not like someone reading from a prepared statement. And 3, I set the cup down, if at any point you say the words pack protocol in a tone that suggests I should find them comforting, I will leave." Sawyer looked at me for a moment. "Noted," he said. "Great. Talk." He folded his hands on the table, looked at them, then looked back up at me with those dark eyes that had entirely too much going on behind them for a Wednesday afternoon. "Hey, Juan, the assessment team ran your scent profile 3 times, he said. "Standard procedure is 1 run. They ran yours 3 times because the first result came back flagged." "Flagged how?" I said. "Triple resonance." He said it carefully, like the words had weight he was trying to distribute evenly. "Your base scent, your secondary markers, your biological compatibility signature, all 3 layers matched all 3 of us simultaneously. Not partially, not in the gray zone. Clean matches, full spectrum, across the board." I wrapped both hands around my coffee cup and said nothing. "That has happened twice in recorded Omegaverse history," Sawyer continued. "Once in 1987 in a pack in Vermont. Once before that in the 1940s in a military unit in what is now New Mexico. In both cases, the bond was classified and buried because the packs involved didn't know how to process it." He paused. "Caden looked at your results and made the same call." "He buried them," I said. "He called them a liability." The word landed in the space between us and just sat there, taking up more room than it deserved. "A liability," I repeated. His reasoning was that a triple match bond creates an omega with equal claim on 3 alpha kings simultaneously. Legally, politically, and biologically. Sawyer's jaw tightened slightly. "It destabilizes pack hierarchy. It raises questions about succession, about authority, about which alpha's designation takes precedence in a bond that technically belongs to all 3 equally. So he decided the easiest solution was to mark me insufficient and send me home." "Yes." I looked at him. Really looked at him. The tiredness around his eyes. The way his shoulders were carrying something he hadn't put down in a while. "And you disagreed," I said. "I voted against it." His voice was level, but the muscle in his jaw moved again. "Red abstained. Caden's vote carried." "Red abstained," I said slowly. "Not voted against. Abstained. Red has his own relationship with complicated situations." Something crossed Sawyer's face that wasn't quite affection and wasn't quite frustration. It was the specific expression of someone describing a person they loved and wanted to shake simultaneously. He doesn't abstain because he doesn't care. He abstains because he cares too much and doesn't know what to do with it yet. I filed that away. "Okay," I said, "so let me make sure I understand the full picture here." I ticked it off on my fingers. "Your pack's assessment confirmed I am biologically matched to all 3 alpha kings in your bloodline. Your oldest brother decided that was a problem rather than a bond, and formally rejected me using language that implied the issue was my deficiency. You wrote 3 words in a margin, called me from a restricted file, and asked me to meet you in a coffee shop 2 blocks from the building where this all happened." I looked at him. "What exactly is it that you want from me, Sawyer?" He was quiet for a moment. "I want you to not disappear," he said. The simplicity of it caught me off guard. And I had been braced for something political, something careful and packaged. Not that. "That's a big ask," I said quietly, "from someone whose name is on the letterhead that told me to go." "I know." Do you? I leaned forward slightly. Because from where I'm sitting, you had a boardroom and a vote and a voice, and you used exactly one of those things. You voted, Sawyer. And then you watched Caden slide that folder across the table, and you said, I'm sorry, like that was sufficient. His expression did something complicated. Like I had pressed on a bruise he had forgotten was there. You're right, he said. Just that. No defense. No explanation wrapped around it to soften the admission. I sat back. In my experience, people who said you're right without immediately following it with, but were either genuinely disarmed or very good at performing disarmament. The vision from the lobby flickered at the edge of my awareness, his hand finding mine in the dark. My precognition had never shown me a future with someone who was bad for me. Not once in 8 years. It had shown me difficult futures, painful ones, complicated ones where the outcome was worth the cost only if I was willing to pay it. It had never shown me warmth with someone who meant me harm. That did not mean I was going to trust him in a coffee shop on a Wednesday because he said you're right and looked tired and smelled like every calm thing I had ever wanted. But it meant I was not leaving yet. The second internal document, I said, the one that wasn't in my folder. So where is it? Sawyer reached into the pocket of his jacket, which was folded over the back of his chair, and slid a single folded page across the table. I opened it. It was the full assessment report, all 3 runs, the flag notation, the historical precedent citations. And at the bottom in the official conclusion field where an assessment team was supposed to write their recommendation, someone had typed 2 words and then manually overridden them before printing the version that went into my folder. The 2 words still faintly visible under the override strike-through were, proceed immediately. I stared at that strike-through for a long time. The assessment team had recommended proceeding with the bond. Someone above them had overridden it before it reached the triplets, which meant Caden had not been the first person to make this call, which meant someone else in the Voss Pack infrastructure had seen these results before Caden did, and buried them first. Sawyer, I said very carefully, who has authorization to override an assessment recommendation before it reaches pack leadership? His expression shifted into something I had not seen on him yet. It looked like fear. Only one person, he said. The coffee shop hummed around us. Someone's espresso machine ran a cycle. The door opened and let in a gust of October air that smelled like pine and exhaust, and the particular cold that came off the mountains when the afternoon started tilting toward evening. Who? I said. Sawyer looked at me across the small table in the warm light of groundwork coffee and said a name that made the vision at the back of my mind crack open like a fault line. A name I recognized, because I had seen it before. In a vision I had at 16 years old, before I knew what the Voss Pack was, before I knew what a triple bond meant, before I knew any of this was coming. A name written in fire. The name Sawyer said was Victor Hale. I knew that name the way you know the shape of a scar you stopped looking at years ago. Not because I had met him, not because he had ever appeared in my life in any tangible, traceable way, but because at 16 years old, sitting on the floor of my childhood bedroom in New Hampshire with my knees pulled to my chest after my first major vision knocked me sideways for 3 hours, I had seen his name written in fire on a document I could not read, just the name, burning, and underneath it, my own handwriting in a language I did not recognize yet, saying something I could not make out. I had spent 8 years filing that vision under unsolved and probably metaphorical. Apparently it was neither. Victor Hale, I said out loud, testing the weight of it. Who is he? Sawyer's hands were very still on the table. That particular stillness that was not calm, but the performance of calm. He was our father's chief advisor, pack strategist. He managed the Voss bloodline's political relationships for 17 years before our father died. Was, I said. He still holds an advisory position. Unofficial now, technically. But Caden keeps him close. A pause. Old habit or loyalty. And I have stopped being able to tell the difference. And he has override authorization on assessment results. He built the assessment system, Sawyer said. 20 years ago, when our father formalized PAC candidacy protocols, he wrote the framework. He knows every layer of it. Something moved behind his eyes, which means he also knows exactly where to reach in and pull a wire without anyone noticing the light went out. I folded the document slowly and set it flat on the table between us. Sawyer, I kept my voice even. How long has Victor Hale been managing which omegas make it to your assessment stage? The silence that followed that question had texture to it, dense and uncomfortable. The kind of silence that meant the person across from you was doing rapid calculations about how much truth the moment could hold. Simon, I don't know, he said, and then quieter. But I think long enough that some of the matches we rejected over the last 4 years may not have been rejections at all. The coffee shop felt smaller suddenly. The espresso machine ran another cycle. Someone laughed at the counter about something completely unrelated to the fact that my entire morning had just reorganized itself around a name I had seen him fire at 16. I picked up my coffee, drank, set it back down. Tell me about your father, I said. Sawyer looked at me. Why? Because Victor Hale served him for 17 years, and your father is dead, and now Hale is Caden's shadow, and I want to understand the shape of the loyalty before I understand the betrayal. I looked at him steadily. Humor me. A long breath moved through Sawyer's chest. Wait, our father was Marcus Voss, he said. Strong alpha. Good pack leader by most metrics. He cared about legacy more than almost anything else. The Voss bloodline, the territory, the succession. He paused. When he found out he was going to have triplets, he was terrified. Not because of the birth, because of what 3 alpha kings with equal designation meant for pack hierarchy. He spent the last 2 years of his life trying to design a system that would prevent conflict between us after he was gone. And Victor helped him design it. Victor designed most of it. Something complicated moved through Sawyer's expression, including apparently the rule that a triple match bond should be classified as a destabilizing event rather than a natural one. I stared at him. Your father put that in the framework, I said slowly. He anticipated a triple bond. He knew it was biologically possible, and he preemptively built the mechanism to suppress it. I think so, yes. Why? Sawyer was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was lower, more careful. Because a triple-matched omega wouldn't just belong to one of us. He would belong to all 3 equally. And our father's entire succession architecture was built on the assumption that one of us would eventually emerge as primary. Lead alpha, the one who carries the pack forward. He met my eyes. An omega who bonds all 3 of us simultaneously doesn't let one of us emerge as primary. We'd be anchored to each other through the bond, through him. Your father thought that was dangerous. My father thought that was the end of his legacy structure. I sat with that for a moment, turned it over. We looked at the underside of it. So Victor buried my results to protect a dead man's blueprint, I said. Victor buried your results to protect Caden, Sawyer said, because Caden has built his entire identity around being primary alpha, around being the one who leads. And a triple bond doesn't have a primary. He paused. I think Victor told him before the official results came through. I think Caden knew before he walked into that boardroom. The marble floor of the boardroom, the folder sliding across the table, Caden's voice. The results are inconclusive at best, insufficient at worst, and his eyes, which had not met mine once. Not for a single second during the entire conversation. Not indifference, guilt. I pressed 2 fingers against my temple and breathed. I want to be very clear about something, I said. I am not angry in a simple way right now. I am angry in a complex architectural way where I can see every floor of the building and I understand exactly how it was constructed, and that is somehow worse than just being furious. I looked at Sawyer. Your brother looked me in the face and called me insufficient because accepting what the assessment actually said would have required him to share. Yes, that is one of the pettiest forms of self-preservation I have ever encountered, and I once knew a man who faked a work injury to avoid a birthday party. Sawyer's mouth moved, almost a smile, the closest thing I had seen from him yet. I know, he said. Does Rhett know, I asked. Not the full picture. He knows something was off about the assessment. He abstained because he could feel Caden making a decision from a place of fear, and he didn't want to co-sign it, but he also didn't know enough to fight it. A beat. Rhett needs a concrete reason to act. Abstract wrongness doesn't move him. Evidence does. And now you have evidence, I said, nodding at the document between us. Now I have evidence, he agreed. I looked at the paper. The strike-through over proceed immediately. The ghost of a recommendation that should have changed everything. Here was the part that I could not say out loud yet. The part that was sitting in my chest like an ember I had not decided what to do with. The vision I had at 16 was not the only time I had seen Victor Hale's name. 3 weeks ago, in the middle of the night, I woke up from a dream where I was standing in a room I did not recognize and someone was handing me a document. And when I looked down at it, the name at the bottom was not Voss. It was Hale, and my own signature was underneath it. I did not know what I had signed. I did not know what room it was or when or why. I just knew that in some version of my future, Victor Hale had gotten close enough to put something in front of me, and I had put my name on it. That scared me more than the rejection had, because my precognition had never once shown me signing something willingly that I later regretted, which meant either I had signed it knowing exactly what it was, or I had signed it not knowing. And only one of those options felt like something I could live with. Sawyer, I said carefully, how much does Victor Hale know about me? He's specifically beyond the assessment file. Sawyer's stillness returned, that performance of calm quality. Why are you asking that? He said. Because I need to know, I said quietly, whether the man who buried my future is someone who made a strategic decision or someone who has been watching me specifically. The mountain wind pressed against the coffee shop windows. Outside, Colorado Springs moved in its ordinary afternoon way, oblivious. Sawyer's jaw tightened. Eli, he said, 3 weeks ago, Victor requested your personal file from the registry, not your assessment file. Your personal file, background, history, family contacts, known abilities. My precognition. He knew about my precognition. I think, I said very quietly, we have a significantly larger problem than Caden's ego. Sawyer did not answer immediately. That was its own kind of answer. He reached across the table and turned the document face down, a careful, deliberate movement, like he was aware the coffee shop had eyes even when it looked empty. Then he pulled out his phone, typed something quickly, and set it face down beside his folded jacket. We need to move, he said. Not far, but not here. You think someone's watching, I said. I think Victor Hale requested your personal file 3 weeks before your assessment date, which means he was not reacting to your results. He was prepared for them. Sawyer's voice was steady, but his eyes were doing that thing again, moving over my face with an attention that felt less like observation and more like memorization. That means he knew about the triple bond possibility before you ever walked into the building. Which means someone told him you were coming. I thought about that. My application, I said, I submitted through the regional registry office. Standard candidacy process. The regional registry feeds directly into Victor's oversight system. Sawyer stood, picking up his jacket. He sees every application before pack leadership does. Has for 20 years. I looked up at him from my chair. So he saw my name, I said, saw my ability listed in the file, and spent 3 weeks building a wall before I arrived to walk into it. That's what I think, yes. Okay. I stood, picked up my coffee because I had paid $4 for it, and I was not leaving it on the table as a tribute to stress. Lead the way. But I want it on record that I am going with you under protest and with full situational awareness, and not because your scent does something irritating to my nervous system. Sawyer looked at me. Noted, he said, and this time the almost smile made it all the way to his eyes. That was considerably more dangerous than the almost smile that hadn't. He took me 2 blocks north to a parking structure where a black SUV was waiting on the second level. Not his car, he explained. Pack vehicle, registered to a subsidiary LLC that did not connect back to the Voss name on any public document. I appreciated the operational thinking, even as I recognized it meant Sawyer had planned for exactly this conversation before he called me, which meant he had been sitting in that boardroom knowing he was going to call me, which meant the apology had been genuine and the planning had been simultaneous, and I was going to need a moment to sort out how I felt about that. I got in the passenger seat. The interior smelled like clean leather and the faint ghost of pine resin, and I directed my attention firmly out the window at the parking structure's concrete wall. Sawyer got in, started the engine, and drove 2 levels down to street level without saying anything. We merged into the Colorado Springs afternoon traffic, the Rockies visible at the end of every east-west street, like a painting someone had hung at the edge of the city. "Where are we going?" I said. "Pack's safe house. It's mine. Not listed in any shared Voss property registry. It's in my name only." He navigated a left turn. "Rhett is already there." I turned to look at him. "Hey, you called Rhett?" "Before I called you." He kept his eyes on the road. He needed to hear it from me directly, not in a building where Caden or Victor could walk in. "How did he take it?" A pause. "Rhett takes things physically first and emotionally second. He put his fist through a wall and then sat down and asked me to show him the document." "That's actually a very efficient grieving process," I said. "Externalize, then analyze. I've seen worse." The corner of Sawyer's mouth moved. "He wants to meet you." "Does he want to meet me, or does he want to meet the person his brother's pack just rejected based on falsified results?" "Both," Sawyer said honestly. "With Rhett, those are the same thing. He doesn't separate the personal from the principle." I looked back out the window. The safe house was not what I expected. So where I had built up a mental image of something fortress-like, all security cameras and reinforced doors and the aesthetic of paranoia. What Sawyer pulled up to was a narrow 2-story house on a residential street in the old North End neighborhood, the kind of block where the trees were tall enough to meet overhead and the houses had front porches with actual furniture on them. The house had a green door. I stared at it. "A green door," I said. "I like green," Sawyer said simply, like that was a complete explanation, and got out of the car. Inside, the house was warm, not aggressively warm, just the particular warmth of a space that was used and lived in and cared for. Wood floors, a bookshelf that had clearly been organized by someone who then gave up halfway through. A kitchen visible through a doorway with a coffee maker that looked like it had been running since early morning, and Rhett Voss standing in the middle of the living room with his arms crossed and his jaw set and his eyes moving over me with an intensity that was nothing like Sawyer's careful attention. Rhett's attention was not careful. It was direct. The kind of direct that did not bother with approach angles because it had decided the shortest line between 2 points was honesty and everything else was a waste of time. His knuckles, I noticed, were wrapped in a cloth. The wall, presumably, had made its point. "You're smaller than I expected," he said. "You're exactly as warm and welcoming as I expected," I said back. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite surprise, more like recalibration. "Ken Sawyer said you were funny," he said. "Sawyer is perceptive." I looked at the wrapped knuckles. "How's the wall?" "Structural damage is minimal." A beat. "My hand is fine." "I wasn't asking about your hand. I was asking about the wall. It didn't do anything wrong." Rhett stared at me for a full 3 seconds. Then he uncrossed his arms, which I understood was approximately the equivalent of anyone else extending a formal greeting. "Sit down," he said. Sawyer made coffee. I sat. What followed was 40 minutes of the most precise and uncomfortable information exchange I had ever participated in, and I had once spent a college semester in a seminar on ethical theory with a professor who considered Socratic method a form of cardio. Rhett laid out everything he had noticed over the last 4 years. Assessment results that felt wrong. Candidates who disappeared from consideration between the regional stage and the formal process with no documentation trail. 2 Omegas specifically in the last 18 months, whose files had been flagged in the registry and then quietly removed. Sawyer connected it to Victor's system access. I sat with my coffee and listened and let the picture build itself. And then there was a moment, somewhere in the middle of Rhett detailing the 3rd disappeared candidate file, where Sawyer reached across the low table between us to point at something on Rhett's phone screen, and his hand passed close to mine where it rested on the cushion beside me. Not touching, just near. Near enough that I felt the warmth of it, and something in my chest did a thing I was not prepared for. Not the electrical precognition response, not the scent recognition short circuit from the lobby. Something quieter than both of those. Something that felt less like discovery and more like recognition of something I had been carrying for a long time without a name for it. The wanting to be near someone. Not for safety, not for strategy. just because the space between you and them felt like a waste. Sawyer glanced at me. I looked back at my coffee. Eli, Rhett said, and something in the way he said my name was different from the way he'd said everything else in the last 40 minutes. Less sharp, more careful. The vision you had at 16, the name and fire. He paused. Have you seen anything else connected to Victor Hale? Anything recent? I looked at him. Rhett Voss was watching me with those direct, one uncompromising eyes, and underneath the intensity, there was something I had not expected to find there. Fear, not of me, for me. I thought about the vision of my own signature under Victor Hale's name, the room I did not recognize, the document I could not read. I thought about the fact that my precognition had never once shown me a future I could not survive. It had shown me painful ones, costly ones, futures where the price of getting somewhere worth being was higher than comfortable, but never unsurvivable. Yes, I said. I've seen something recent. Rhett and Sawyer both went still. I'm in a room I don't recognize, I said carefully, and I'm signing something with Victor Hale's name on it. The warmth of the house pressed around us. Outside, the tall trees on the residential street moved in the October wind. Gay willingly, Sawyer said. It was not quite a question. That, I said, is exactly what I'm trying to figure out. The silence after I said that lasted exactly long enough to become uncomfortable. Then Rhett stood up, not aggressively, not the way he had presumably stood up before introducing his fist to the wall. This was different, slower, the movement of someone who needed to be vertical in order to think clearly, like his body processed information better when it was upright and moving. He walked to the window, looked out at the residential street, the tall trees, the ordinary Wednesday afternoon happening outside like none of this was occurring 12 feet away from it. If Victor knows about your precognition, Rhett said, his back still to me, then he didn't pull your file out of caution. He pulled it because your ability is useful to him. That occurred to me, I said. A precognitive omega with a triple bond claim on the Voss bloodline. Rhett turned around. His eyes were sharper than they had been 20 minutes ago, which I had not thought was possible. That's not a liability to Victor. That's leverage. Either he controls you or he neutralizes you before you become a problem he can't manage. Neutralizes, I repeated. That's a very clinical word for what I think you mean. I say what I mean, Rhett said. I know. I actually appreciate that about you. It's refreshing after a morning of corporate euphemism. I set my coffee down. So his options were suppress the bond, hope I go away quietly, and if I don't, use whatever he knows about my ability to put me somewhere he can watch me. I paused. Chone, which brings us back to the document in the vision. He's going to come at me with something official, something that looks like an offer, or a threat dressed as one, Sawyer said quietly. The front door opened. All three of us turned. Caden Voss stood in the doorway of the green door house with his jacket still on, and his expression doing something I had not seen it do in the boardroom. In the boardroom, it had been closed, sealed, a face used to performing certainty regardless of what lived underneath it. Right now, it was not performing anything. It was just tired. He looked at Sawyer first, then Rhett. Then his eyes moved to me, sitting on the couch with a coffee cup and the internal document on the cushion beside me, and something in his jaw shifted. You found him, Caden said to Sawyer. Not accusatory, almost resigned. And I called him, Sawyer said. There's a difference. How did you know where we were? Rhett said. His voice had dropped to something flat and careful that I suspected meant he was significantly angrier than he looked. Because I know this house, Caden said. I know every property Sawyer owns. Same way he knows mine. He stepped inside and closed the door behind him. Did not move further into the room. Just stood there, still near the exit, like he was preserving the option of retreat. Victor came to see me 20 minutes ago. He told me Sawyer had accessed the full assessment file and left the building with someone. He's watching the building, I said. Caden looked at me. Yes, he said. Great. So the man who buried my results to protect your succession position is now monitoring your brother's movements and reporting back to you. I held his gaze. How does it feel, knowing your advisor is your surveillance system? Caden's expression tightened. I didn't ask Victor to watch the building. But you're not surprised that he does. A pause. No, he said. I'm not surprised. The honesty of that landed differently than I expected. I had been ready for deflection, for the polished boardroom version of Caden Voss who moved problems into folders and called them resolved. This version was standing near a green door in a house that belonged to his brother, admitting that his own advisor operated surveillance without being asked to, and looking at me like he was trying to work out whether I was the source of a problem or the end of one. Rhett had not moved from the window. "Did you know about the override?" he said. 2 seconds of silence. "Rhett, it's a yes or no question, Caden. It is not a yes or no situation." "It absolutely is," I said. "Victor overrode the assessment recommendation before it reached you. Either you knew he did that or you didn't. Those are the only two options available in this reality." Caden looked at me with an expression that was not quite anger and not quite respect. Something that lived in the uncomfortable territory between being challenged and being seen. "I knew the results had been reviewed before they reached me," he said carefully. "And I did not know the full recommendation had been altered." "So you knew Victor had touched the file," Sawyer said. His voice was very quiet. "And you still presented those results in that boardroom like they were clean." "I presented the results I was given." "You presented them as your conclusion," Sawyer said. "You said inconclusive. You said insufficient. Those were your words, Caden. You put them in your mouth and you said them to his face." The room held that for a moment. I watched Caden's face move through something it clearly did not do often. The architecture of his composure had a crack in it now, hairline thin but visible, running from the set of his jaw down through the careful stillness of his hands. "I made a decision based on incomplete information," he said. "One, you made a decision based on fear," Rhett said from the window. "And then you let Victor hand you a justification for it, and you took it because it was easier than sitting with what the real results meant." Caden turned to look at his brother. Something passed between them that had clearly been building for longer than today. Longer than this assessment, the particular weight of brothers who knew each other's worst qualities with the intimacy that only proximity and shared blood could build. "You abstained," Caden said to Rhett. Low and precise, like a blade finding a specific angle. "You had a vote. You could have said no. You sat there and you said nothing." Rhett's jaw moved. "I abstained because I didn't have enough to fight you with. I knew something was wrong and I couldn't prove it. And yet here we are," Caden said. "With proof. And you're standing at a window judging me for doing what you didn't have the courage to oppose in the moment. That is not the same thing." "It is exactly the same thing, Rhett. Neither of us stopped it. The difference is, I made a call, and you hid behind a technicality." "Stop," Sawyer said. Both of them looked at him. Sawyer was looking at me. I had gone very still. Not because the argument was not valid. It was. Both of them were right about each other in the specific, excruciating way that people who love each other are capable of being right. But I had gone still because the vision had come back. Not a new one. The old one from the boardroom. The one that hit me when my palm touched the marble table. Caden's hands shaking. Rhett's voice cracking on my name. Sawyer at the window with his forehead against the glass. And me, standing in a doorway, deciding. I understood the doorway now. I was in it. Not physically, but I was standing at the threshold of something, and the decision was already forming in my chest with the particular weight of things that had been inevitable since before I understood why. "Caden," I said. He looked at me, that tired, cracked open face. "The document Victor is going to bring me," I said. "The one in my vision. I think you know what it is." The silence that followed was a different quality from all the previous silences. This one had guilt in it, thick and specific, and directed entirely at me. "It's a suppression agreement," Caden said. "A legal document that would classify your ability as a pack security concern and place you under Voss advisory oversight." His voice was flat. "Indefinitely." "Victor's oversight," I said. "Yes, which you knew was coming." The crack in his composure widened. "I found out this morning," he said, "before the assessment. Victor told me it was a precaution, that if your results came back the way he expected them to, the agreement would need to be ready." The room went completely silent. Sawyer made a sound that was not quite a word. Rhett turned from the window and looked at his brother with an expression I did not want to be on the receiving end of. And I looked at Caden Voss and understood, with the precise and total clarity that my precognition sometimes delivered without warning, that he had walked into that boardroom this morning knowing Victor had a document waiting and had rejected me anyway. Not entirely out of fear, out of something he had mistaken for protection. You thought, I said slowly, that if you rejected me cleanly, Victor would have no reason to use the agreement, that if I walked away, I'd be safe from him. Caden said nothing, which was its own answer. That, I said, is simultaneously the most thoughtful and most catastrophically wrong thing anyone has ever done in my general direction. The word catastrophically hung in the air of that warm little house, like smoke after a fire that had already done its damage. Caden did not defend himself. That was the thing I had not prepared for. When every version of this conversation I had constructed in my head on the drive over involved Caden Voss being precisely what he had been in that boardroom. Cold, certain, armored in the particular way of men who had been taught that leadership meant never visibly doubting yourself. This version was standing near a green door, with his hands loose at his sides and his face carrying something that looked, at close range, remarkably like a man who had made a calculated sacrifice and was only now understanding what he had actually spent. Say something, Rhett said to him. Not aggressive, almost quiet, which from Rhett I was learning meant it was serious. I don't know what to say, Caden said. That is the most human thing you have said all day, I told him. Genuinely. Mark the timestamp. He looked at me. Not the boardroom look. Not the assessed and found wanting look. Something rawer than that. Something that did not have a corporate language equivalent. I thought Victor's interest in you was purely political, he said. A triple bond claim creates succession complications. I understood his reasoning. I agreed with his concern, even if I disagreed with his methods. A pause. I did not understand until this morning that his interest in you was not about the bond at all. It's about the precognition, I said. Yes, because a precognitive omega under his oversight is not a complication he's managing. It's an asset he's acquiring. Caden nodded once. Tight and precise. When did you figure that out? Sawyer asked him. When he came to my office this morning with the suppression agreement already drafted. Something moved through Caden's expression that I was starting to be able to read. It was the specific look of a man realizing he had been used as an instrument by someone he trusted. He presented it as protection, as a legal framework to keep you safe from outside pack interest in your ability. And I sat there and I thought about the assessment results and the complications and the succession structure our father built. His jaw tightened. And then I thought about the fact that Victor had drafted a 17-page legal document overnight, before the assessment results were even officially filed. The room was very still. He drafted it before the assessment, I said. The document creation timestamp was 4 days ago, Caden said, when I checked after he left my office. 4 days ago, I had been in New Hampshire, packing a bag and confirming my travel to Colorado Springs, telling myself the flashes of 3 unfamiliar alpha voices in my dreams were just pre-assessment nerves, and definitely not the universe pointing me somewhere with both hands. Victor Hale had been drafting a suppression agreement. I picked up my coffee. It was cold now. I drank it anyway because I needed something to do with my hands that was not putting them flat on a surface and accidentally accessing a vision at a moment when I needed my full attention on the present. Okay, I said. Here is where we are. Victor Hale has a 17-page suppression agreement with my name on it. He has surveillance on this building. He knew about my ability before I arrived in Colorado. He buried the assessment results through a system he built specifically to give himself that access. I looked around the room at all 3 of them, and the 3 of you have spent the last several hours in various configurations of knowing things, hiding things, and apologizing for things. Which means right now I am the only person in this house who has a complete picture. Rhett raised an eyebrow. You have a complete picture. I have precognition and I have been paying attention, I said. Those are functionally the same thing. I set the cup down. Victor is going to make his move today, not tomorrow, not after he reassesses the situation. Today, because Sawyer accessed the file, which means Victor knows the suppression window is closing. How do you know it's today? Sawyer asked. Because I saw snow in my vision, I said. Why? And it is not snowing, which means the vision has not happened yet. And I have never in 8 years had a vision that took longer than 24 hours to arrive once it started showing up with that level of detail. I looked at the window. The October afternoon outside was still clear. Cold but clear. It will snow tonight. The vision happens tonight. Caden and Sawyer looked at each other. Rhett looked at me with those direct, undecorated eyes. You said in your vision you were signing the document. Does that mean you're planning to sign it? I'm planning to make Victor believe I'm going to sign it, I said. The room recalibrated. Explain, Caden said. One word. But it was a different kind of one word than the boardroom. Less command, more request. I turned to look at him directly. My precognition doesn't show me futures I can't change. It shows me futures I'm walking towards so I can decide whether to keep walking or take a different road. The vision of that document is not a prophecy. It's a warning with a map attached. I paused. Victor wants a signed suppression agreement because a signed agreement gives him legal oversight of my movements, my ability, and my pack status. Which means if I appear to be willing to sign it, he stops surveilling and starts preparing the handover. And while he's preparing, Sawyer said slowly, we take apart the assessment system he built, I said. Every override, every buried candidate, every file he touched in 20 years. All of it documented and submitted to the Regional Omegaverse Oversight Board before he realizes the signing meeting was never going to happen. Silence. Then Rhett made a sound that was, I was almost certain, a laugh. Short and surprised and genuine. The kind that escapes before a person can decide whether to let it. You've been planning this since the lobby, he said. I've been planning this since I was 16 and saw a name written in fire, as I said. I just didn't have the other pieces until today. Caden was looking at me with that unreadable expression that I was beginning to suspect was not actually unreadable. It was just a face that required patience to translate, and underneath the careful construction of it, right now, was something that looked a great deal like the moment a person stops seeing a complication and starts seeing a person. The assessment result, he said quietly, the recommendation that was overridden, if we document Victor's system access and submit it to the oversight board, the results get reinstated. Yes, I said, which means the triple bond claim becomes official pack record. Yes, he held my gaze. You understand what that means legally, what it would require from all three of us. I understand what it means, I said. The question is whether you do. Something shifted in the room, not dramatically, not with the cinematic weight of a thunderclap or a sudden change in the light. Just a quiet shift, like the temperature dropping half a degree before snow, the kind your body registers before your mind catches up. Caden crossed the room. He stopped in front of me with 2 feet of distance between us, which was closer than he had been at any point today. And he looked at me with that cracked open face that had stopped performing anything. I owe you an apology, he said. A real one. Not the kind that comes with an explanation attached to soften it. I know, I said. I'm sorry. Clean. Direct. No qualifier following it. I looked at him for a long moment, at the exhaustion around his eyes, at the specific weight of a man who had been trying to hold everything together for so long that he had started making decisions with his fears instead of his judgment, and hadn't noticed when those two things traded places. I did not forgive him. Not yet. Forgiveness was not a thing I handed out in living rooms on the same day as the wound. But I noted the apology with the specific mental filing system I used for things that mattered and needed time. We need to move fast, I said. Victor will come to me directly once he confirms I haven't left the city. We need every override document pulled, time-stamped, and ready before he does. I looked around the room. Tell me you have people who can do that. I have 3 people in the registry office I trust completely, Sawyer said. I have access to the legal filing system for the oversight board, Rhett said. His voice had a quality in it now that had not been there at the start of this conversation. Something that sounded like direction, like a man who had found his concrete reason to act. Then we have tonight, I said. Outside, the first cloud moved across the Colorado sky, gray and heavy and moving in from the mountains, with the particular intention of weather that had already decided what it was going to do. I watched it through the window. Snow, I thought. Right on schedule. And under that thought, quieter, not quite ready to be said out loud yet, but present and warm and stubborn as anything. Maybe this is what I saw at 16. Not the fire, not the name, the moment after. The room with the warm light, the hand in the dark. Maybe that was always the destination. The snow started at 7:43 p.m. I know the exact time because I was watching the window when the first flakes came down, soft and unhurried, settling on the old North End street outside like the sky had made a quiet decision and was following through on it without drama. There it is, I thought. My phone buzzed 11 minutes later. Unknown number. Different area code from Sawyer's, but I already knew who it was before I answered, the same way I had always known things before they arrived. That bone-deep recognition that lived below thought. "Mr. Calloway," Victor Hale said. His voice was smooth, the voice of a man who had spent decades being the most reasonable person in every room. "I believe we need to talk." "I've been expecting your call," I said. A small pause, calculated. "Then you're already ahead of most people I deal with." "That's because most people you deal with don't see you coming," I said pleasantly. "I literally do. It's a whole thing. Where would you like to meet?" He named a hotel downtown. "Neutral ground," he said. "Somewhere quiet." I said yes. I said yes because Sawyer's 3 registry contacts had spent the last 4 hours pulling every document Victor had touched in 20 years, and Rhett had the oversight board filing system open on his laptop. And Caden had spent the last 2 hours on the phone with the regional board's emergency ethics line in a conversation that had started stiff and formal, and somewhere around the 90-minute mark had become something that sounded like a man genuinely confessing to the specific shape of his own complicity. I said yes because the trap was set and Victor was walking into it, and he did not know that yet because he had spent 20 years being the most reasonable person in every room and had stopped accounting for the possibility that someone might be more prepared than him. I put on my jacket. Sawyer appeared in the doorway of the kitchen. "I'm coming with you." "You're staying here," I said. "If Victor sees you with me, he knows the filing is already in motion. He needs to believe I'm coming alone because I'm scared and I want this handled quietly." Sawyer's jaw tightened. "I don't like it." "I know," I straightened my collar. "I've seen how it ends." "I like it fine." He looked at me for a long moment in the warm kitchen light of that green door house, and something in his expression did the thing it had been doing incrementally all day, moving further away from careful and closer to open. "Eli," he said. "Sawyer. When you get back." He stopped, started again. "When this is over, I need to say something to you that I have been constructing and deconstructing since the lobby, and I would like the opportunity to actually say it." "I know what you want to say," I told him. "You've seen it?" "No," I said. "I just know. You have a very legible face when you stop managing it." I picked up my keys. "Save it for when I get back. It'll land better." The hotel was 12 minutes from the house through snow-dusted streets. I drove with both hands on the wheel, and my heart beat steady and my mind very clear. Victor Hale was waiting in a private lounge off the main lobby. 60-something, silver-haired, the kind of man who looked trustworthy because he had practiced it for so long it had become structural. He had a folder on the table in front of him. 17 pages, I assumed. He stood when I came in, which was a nice touch. The performance of courtesy from a man who had spent 4 days drafting a document to put me in a cage. "Mr. Calloway," he said, "thank you for coming." "Of course," I said, and sat down across from him. "I figured we should meet face to face. Given that you've had my personal file for 3 weeks and I only just learned your name today, it felt like the relationship was a little unbalanced." Something moved in his eyes. Reassessment, quick and careful. "You're well informed." "I'm precognitive," I said. "There's a difference. Being well informed implies I had to work for it." He smiled. It did not reach anywhere near his eyes. "Then you understand why your ability creates certain concerns from a pack security standpoint." "I understand why it creates concerns from your standpoint specifically," I said, "which is a different thing." He opened the folder, turned it toward me. "This agreement would formalize your status under Voss advisory oversight. It protects you legally. Mine ensures your ability isn't exploited by outside interests." I looked at the document. 17 pages. My name on the signature line at the bottom, clean and waiting. I looked at it for a long moment, and I felt nothing that resembled fear. What I felt was the particular quiet of a person who had been moving toward a moment for 8 years and had finally arrived at it and found it smaller than the dread and larger than the hope, which was exactly how important moments always felt up close. I looked up at Victor Hale. The Regional Oversight Board received a complete filing 40 minutes ago, I said. Every document you touched in the Voss assessment system over the last 20 years. Every override. Every suppressed candidate. Every timestamp. I folded my hands on the table, including the one on this agreement, which was created 4 days before my assessment, which means you drafted a suppression document for a person whose results you hadn't seen yet, which is a lovely piece of evidence that the suppression was never about pack security. Victor had gone very still. It was always about controlling the one variable your system couldn't account for, I said. A precognitive omega with a triple bond claim doesn't just complicate succession. He can see the architecture of what you built, every wire you pulled, every light you turned off. I stood. The oversight board will be in contact with you directly. I'd recommend having representation ready before morning. I picked up my keys. You should know, Victor said, and his voice had shed the reasonable texture entirely now, something harder underneath it, by that the Voss Pack will not survive the scandal this filing creates. The Voss Pack will survive it because Caden Voss spent 2 hours tonight telling the oversight board exactly what he knew and when he knew it, I said. Voluntary disclosure changes the legal picture significantly. I'd have thought a pack strategist would know that. I left him sitting with his 17-page document in a hotel lounge while snow came down outside, and Colorado did not care about either of us. The drive back to the Green Door house took 12 minutes. When I opened the front door, all three of them were in the living room. Red on the phone, speaking to someone in the clipped, efficient shorthand of a man wrapping up logistics. Caden standing by the bookshelf with his jacket off and his sleeves rolled, and his face carrying the specific lightness of a man who had confessed something and discovered the weight of the secret had been heavier than the consequence of telling it. And Sawyer, who crossed the room before I had fully closed the door. He stopped in front of me. Close. The wood smoke scent warm and immediate, and no longer something I was managing a clinical distance from. How did it go? He said. Exactly how I saw it, I said. He exhaled. Something in his shoulders released that had been held since the coffee shop. I have something to say, he said. I know. Stop knowing things for 30 seconds and let me say it. I pressed my lips together. Fine. 30 seconds. Go. I voted to keep you, he said. Because the moment your file came across my desk, something in me recognized you before I had any rational reason to. And I have spent today watching you dismantle a 20-year infrastructure with a coffee cup and a precognitive ability and a deeply impressive vocabulary of controlled frustration. His eyes were very steady on mine. I am not asking you to forgive any of us tonight. I am not asking you to stay because of the bond or the legal record or what the results say we are to each other. He paused. I'm asking you to stay because I would like to know you. The rest of it can earn itself. The warm house held the three of them, and the snow outside, and the particular stillness of something that had finally arrived after a long travel. I looked at Sawyer for a moment, then I looked at Rhett, who had finished his call and was watching me with those direct, honest eyes and saying nothing, because he had apparently decided that Sawyer had handled this one correctly and did not need the assist. Then I looked at Caden, who was watching me from across the room with that cracked open face and the quiet of a man who understood that some things could not be asked for, only waited for. I saw a vision at 16, I said. Warm light in a window, someone's hand finding mine in the dark. I looked back at Sawyer. I spent 8 years thinking it was a destination. I think it was actually a choice. I reached out. Sawyer's hand met mine in the warm light of that Green Door house, steady and certain, like it had been waiting in exactly that position for exactly this moment. Behind me, I heard Red exhale. Across the room, had Caden closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, the last of the boardroom was gone. Outside, Colorado kept snowing. The Rockies sat against the dark sky, enormous and patient and entirely unbothered, the way they always were. And I stood in the warm light of a house with a green door, held by a future I had finally decided to walk into. This time I chose who deserved me. And for the first time in 8 years, the vision I saw next was just us. Nothing burning, nothing buried, just morning light and the particular piece of a future that had stopped being a warning and started being a home. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed it, you'll definitely love the next one. It's even crazier and more intriguing than you can imagine. Don't forget to subscribe and stay tuned. The next story drops soon.